CBS News. Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan Sunday on CBS.
Tonight, a Texas showdown over enforcement tactics at the U.S.-Mexico border. And how should police canine units be used at traffic stops? Questions arise after a troubling arrest. Plus, the brutal heat wave expands. What areas are getting hit hardest on the CBS Evening News?
We don't want to see a really radical abortion amendment put in our state constitution. This is about protecting our state constitution from out-of-state special interests.
I didn't do it, and I wasn't involved in it.
I didn't do it, and I'm not involved in it, are not the words of leadership.
Our first job is to pass NDAA, and then we'll see what goes from there.
175 days until the Iowa caucus and 469 days until America decides on Election Day 2024. Welcome to Washington. I'm Ed O'Keefe. We're also just less than a month away from the first GOP presidential debate in Milwaukee. One big unknown, it's still unclear if former President Donald Trump will be there. Multiple Republican candidates say they've met the polling and fundraising qualifications set by the Republican National Committee to participate. The former president certainly has, but the former vice president, Mike Pence, is among those still working to make the stage. For more on all of this, Caitlin Huey-Burns and Finn Gomez join us now. Caitlin, of course, the CBS News political correspondent, and Finn, the CBS News political director. Good to see both of you. What's so exciting for those that watch this show and put it together is we finally have some numbers. Yes. We spend a lot of time ad nauseum talking about where this thing is headed. Right. We saw some polling over the weekend that suggests the current contours of this race. Looking at the race in Iowa, according to this poll from our colleagues at Fox Business, former President Donald Trump up by 30 points now, some slippage there by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. And then in the state of South Carolina, he's up by even more, trailed by the home state former Governor Nikki Haley, then Governor DeSantis, and then the state's junior Senator Tim Scott. And that suggests that that's essentially the ballgame right now, save for a few others who, thanks to a lot of media appearances and their own money, have earned their way onto the debate stage. Caitlin, though, it's a signal that there really is nothing stopping the former president despite his legal issues.
Yeah, and I agree. It's good to have these polls. It's good to have early state polls because this is not a national primary. What was interesting to me, though, you mentioned the lack of movement, really. Donald Trump has maintained his lead over this field in these early states. And I was looking back to this time about 4 years ago when we were covering the Democratic primary, and you had Elizabeth Warren surging in the summer. You had volatility in the race. There was movement. There were candidates at the time trying to present themselves as the ones to take on Donald Trump and the alternative to Joe Biden at the time. So there was movement there. We're just not seeing that kind of movement. It is interesting to note, though, that Tim Scott is making some kind of play. What he's doing seems to be at least working to the way that they want to see it. And having seen him a couple of times now in Iowa, he is really gearing towards those voters who are evangelical-based. Faith is a huge part of his campaign. He walks around kind of sermon style. He doesn't take to the podium. He walks around the crowd and is trying to kind of master that retail politics that we all know works well in Iowa. Again, though, Donald Trump still maintaining this lead, and he knows it and is able to skip a lot of these traditional things that the other candidates really have to keep attending.
Again, one of the reasons why it's so great to see the data is you had heard it from voters that Tim Scott was on their list. We'd heard it in our visits to South Carolina and Iowa, and now we're seeing it. Part of why he's on the move has to do with his advertising, right, Finn?
That's absolutely right. And you've seen the only really movement that we have seen in these early polls, in these early state polls, has been Tim Scott. You know, you've seen him, he's only about 5 points behind in Iowa, as you mentioned, CHB, and he's made serious inroads with his faith voters. And yes, part of it, I spoke to some senior PAC members, the pro-Scott PAC, who have placed a $40 million TV and digital ad reserve through August, essentially. It's on top, through the fall, on top of the $7 million they already have to spend through August. That's a lot of money to spend on ads. And they're saying they're having this positive effect, this impact in these early states, especially in Iowa, South Carolina. And even in New Hampshire, we've seen some movement there by Tim Scott. But They primarily say their message, the senior advisors tell me, their movement, they say, the Tim Scott advisors, is because his positivity is working, his positive message, in contrast to Trump and in contrast to DeSantis. However, some other Republican rivals to Scott, to DeSantis, to Trump say that may be the case. He has a high approval rating, 89% favorable among some Republicans in these polls. However, where's the substance, they say?
Yeah.
Where's the substance?
So we're all gearing towards an event at the end of the week in Iowa, the state party's dinner. Most of these guys will be there in one way or another. There will be appearances before and after that. We have to watch and see how a Ron DeSantis, a Mike Pence, a Vivek Ramaswamy talk about Tim Scott to try to chip away at what he does. We'll watch that over the course of the week. The other interesting set of numbers that came out this morning are in regards to Ohio, and another issue, Caitlin, you've been following closely, and that is, of course, abortion rights or access to abortion services. The Buckeye State, the only one this year set to hold a statewide referenda on the future of abortion rights, and there's polling today to suggest what?
Well, it's really interesting, and bear with us a little bit because there are some nuances to this. Basically, Ohio is likely to be the only state to have a constitutional amendment to protect access to abortion. That's expected to happen later this fall. But anticipating that, state lawmakers set a special election for August of this year, so in just a couple of weeks, to change the threshold to be able to get approval of a constitutional amendment. And that's all significant because we have polling out today that shows about 58% of Ohio likely voters support this constitutional amendment to protect abortion access. So 58%. The state legislature wants to ask voters in the special election to change that threshold to 60%.
Yeah.
So this has been a strategy. We've covered this extensively. A lot of money has been involved by a big Republican mega donor to try to push this special election forward. So if voters approve this measure in a couple of weeks to change the threshold, that 58% won't be enough to pass. But if they do keep the rules in place, this Ohio test will be kind of a test for the next year about how this issue is a pretty potent one in American politics. We've seen that proven again, but especially in a state like Ohio, a very conservative state now, could be kind of a barometer as other groups are watching to see how this plays out.
I mean, my goodness, if abortion rights are preserved in the ruby red state of Ohio, where can Republicans expect to play on this issue in a big state, you know, like a Wisconsin or a Michigan or a Georgia or an Arizona, where time after time we'll have seen voters say, no, leave those rights in place?
And does it help, is it an opening perhaps for the Biden-Harris reelect in this state that, as you mentioned, has consistently gone red over the last few cycles and has become ruby red? Is this now an opening? Can they actually gain some ground there in the general election?
So August 8th is the vote on whether to change the threshold for
to be able to pass these amendments, so requiring 60% versus a simple majority.
But then tomorrow, the Secretary of State has to verify whether or not the abortion thing actually gets on the ballot in November.
Gets enough signatures,
yeah. So we'll watch that as well. Caitlin Huey-Burns and Finn Gomez, thank you both. We'll keep an eye on all those things and talk to you later in the week. Florida is facing intense scrutiny of changes to its Black history curriculum. A member of the State Senate Education Committee joins us to react to the changes next. You're streaming America Decides.
If it's important to our nation,
I wonder how you think about where America is at this moment.
It's on Face the Nation.
Can there be stability if Vladimir Putin remains in power?
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education. Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
I always tell people that Twitter would not be Twitter without Black Twitter. It's just us being in fellowship with each other.
And it becomes a conversation you don't want to be left out of.
People really started to recognize the power of activism on Twitter.
Based on that one tweet, the hashtag #OscarsSoWhite was trending around the world.
If anything has really powered Black Twitter, it's been humor.
If your food ain't right, oh, we're going to tell you about that too.
We tend to create change, create culture and cool.
That's how movements happen on Black Twitter and go beyond more than that.
Black Twitter, the Twitterverse that changed a generation. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather turns extreme,
The threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
Let's bring in our partners at the Weather Channel.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battering rams.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
Feel the forecast, streaming on CBS News.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
The carnage in our nation's schools has become painfully repetitive.
Not one more child!
School shootings have parents fighting mad.
I promised my daughter I was going to fight. It's going to keep on happening.
And teachers taking lessons in how to fight back.
This is an exercise.
We approach it as it's you or them.
It shouldn't have to be your teacher's job to protect your life.
But will the battle over gun control,
People are afraid that they're going to lose their gun rights altogether.
be the hardest lesson of all?
The exercise, you're having to shoot at an adult. Are you prepared to have to kill one of your students?
Guns in the Classroom, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She's the most successful alpine skier, male or female, ever, and a worldwide inspiration.
We need a lot of women doing sports really, really well.
The story of Michaela Schifrin's game-changing reign at the top of the slopes when we go person to person.
Welcome back to America Decides. There is national attention on Florida's new education standards that now include guidelines teaching middle school students that some enslaved people actually benefited from slavery. The new teaching guidelines are a result of legislation known as the Stop Woke Act that Governor Ron DeSantis signed into law last year. The bill required the rewriting of the state's education standards. A part of the new standards say students should be taught about the, quote, harsh conditions enslaved people endured, but also, quote, how slaves developed skills which, in some instances, could be applied for personal benefit, unquote. Vice President Harris has seized on the issue in recent days in a series of appearances across the country. Last Friday, she traveled to Florida to draw even more attention to the issue, and today in Chicago, she condemned the changes yet again.
And for these extremists, that was not enough. They now push forward revisionist history. They push propaganda. They suggest that enslaved people benefited from slavery, as they insult us in an attempt to gaslight us. Well, we will not have it.
Now, Governor DeSantis was asked about the new education standards on Friday while campaigning in Utah. He said this.
You should talk to them about it. I mean, I didn't do it, and I wasn't involved in it. But I think what they're doing is I think that they're probably going to show some of the folks that eventually parlayed being a blacksmith into doing things later in life. But the reality is all of that is rooted in whatever is factual. They listed everything out. And if you have any questions about it, just ask the Department of Education.
Well, we did ask, and we had hoped to speak today with Florida Education Commissioner Manny Diaz Jr. about these changes. CBS News has followed up several times today and received no reply. If and when they do reply or consent to an interview, you'll see it here. But we do have a critic of these changes with us tonight, Florida Democratic State Senator Chevron Jones, who represents part of Miami-Dade County and is a member of the state Senate's Committee on Education, joins us now. Senator, thank you for being with us. I know you've expressed concern with these standards. Other language in it, I've got about the first 21 pages of the new standards here, which have to do with African-American history. And I believe it's on page 17 that the standards say if high schoolers learn about race massacres, teachers must include, quote, acts of violence perpetrated against and by African Americans. In essence, suggesting that, yes, things happen to African Americans, but they may have also committed acts of violence. You serve on the state Senate's Education Committee. How troubled are you by that, by what it says about how slaves may have benefited from being enslaved?
First, thank you again for having me. And I continue to have to check to make sure it's 2023 and not 1963 with some of these policies that we're dealing with in Florida. It's a shame that I even have to say this, but slavery just was not a benefit to the enslaved. This idea that slavery was a benefit to the enslaved is absolutely asinine. Teaching that they gained skills from slavery just totally implies they didn't have skills to begin with, which is insane. They brought a knowledge and were not compensated for it. It's appalling, but it's also not surprising because this is the very same administration that for the past 6 months they did away with the African American studies through the College Board. They did away with what you can and cannot say when you're teaching African American studies. So there's no surprise to me that we have landed here today and that the department is trying to walk back their comments because they know what they did was wrong and disgusting.
Now, and we should point out, this is about a 215-page document that lays out all sorts of social studies curricula for grades kindergarten through 12th grade. The two things we've called out are amid 21 pages of suggested things on African American history, including teaching first graders about African American artists, teaching older students about African Americans who demonstrated heroism and patriotism, and it includes Booker T. Washington, Jesse Owens, President Obama. It's these two and other things said about slavery and violence to or against African Americans that has caused this grave concern and drawn so much attention. What do you make of Governor DeSantis now saying that he isn't to blame for this?
Well, Governor DeSantis is the governor. He has been the same one over the last few years who has been wanting to be the governor. He wants to be the chief justice. He wants to be the speaker of the House, Senate president. Yeah, he has been leading with a strong hand, so much so that the senators and the House members can't even operate as an independent body because everything goes through the governor's office. And this idea that they even use someone like the Booker T. Washington to justify, Booker T. Washington became successful later in life, long after their emancipation, in spite of their time as a slave. It wasn't because of it. And so this continued misrepresentation of who we are as African Americans, we run the risk of raising an entire generation of young people who do not know who they are, where they come from, and the truth about their history. That is the epitome of indoctrination.
We mentioned we invited your state's education commissioner, Manny Diaz Jr., on and followed up several times with no reply. He did, though, defend the new standards. I want to play what he said and get your reaction on the other side.
What we should be striving to do is provide our students with all of this information and let them formulate their own opinions. That is what true learning is.
Your reaction to what he said?
I used to be a teacher. I know what diversity of thought is, and I know what educational freedom is. When you're tying the hands of teachers and when you're trying to control the minds of children, that is not what he's trying to suggest, unfortunately. And so I will say that I did speak with the commissioner today. And I'm proud that he's going to come have a conversation with the community because the community is outraged. People are rightfully angry right now, and they want to be heard first and foremost. Now's the time to start that dialogue. So that's why I'm excited to announce first right here that we are currently in the process of organizing an event with Commissioner Diaz where he can address the community's concern directly with them at the historic Antioch Missionary Baptist Church. That's going to take place on August 10th at 7 o'clock p.m.
That's there in your district there in Miami-Dade?
That's right. It's right in my district in Miami Gardens. Because listen, people are so frustrated right now, from the church community to individuals in the lay community and abroad. Not just Blacks are upset. People abroad are upset because if you start coming for one group of people, who's next? And that's what we've been seeing with this administration. Every 6 months, it seems like there is something that we're fighting for while Governor DeSantis is running for president. And mind you, while all of this is happening, we're not discussing the real issues that we need to deal with. We're not discussing the fact that property insurance is astronomical here. We're not discussing the fact that the reading proficiency amongst our young people have not been addressed. We're not discussing the shortage of teachers. That's 6,000 plus of vacancies. None of that is being discussed. It's the culture wars that continue to suck the energy out of the room in Florida.
So let me just follow up. You said you spoke with the commissioner today.
Yeah.
He agreed to come on August 10th, you said, to your district to talk about this. Did you get a sense that he's getting a lot of calls like this from other lawmakers across the state?
I wouldn't be surprised that he's getting those same type of calls. I represent the largest Black district in the state, and so rightfully so, it's important that he come address the community.
Federal Education Department told CBS News today states set the education standards for their own schools, essentially signaling there's nothing that can be done at the federal level. Beyond having the commissioner come to your district there in Miami Gardens, what more could you and your colleagues in state government do to address these changes and the concerns of your constituents?
You know what? I know that we are at a disadvantage when it comes to the numbers in the House and in the Senate. And so I know both leaders, Leader Fentress Driscoll and Leader Lauren Book in the Senate, are working to ensure that we create more of a balanced chamber that will allow for these things not just continue to be pushed down our throats during the legislative session. The only reason why the Republicans are in this position now in Florida is because they can. And so the slim majority that they have right now in the Senate, we're going to have to change that so we can hold them accountable for the things that's happening. But along with that, it's also engaging the community. The community are very outraged right now, but we're trying to show the community how they can take this outrage and turn it into action. Because we can't be so mad that we're going to do what needs to be done to bring about that change. I know that's what we're doing in our community. We're having a series of meetings that's happening to engage people back. So next time when election time comes next year, people know and they're clear on the agenda and the people are truly fighting for them. And they'll know exactly who needs to be serving in the legislature and also locally.
To be continued, Florida State Senator Chevron Jones, who represents Miami Gardens there, Miami-Dade County, Florida. Thank you so much for spending some time with us and for sharing that news of your plans to meet with the commissioner next month.
Thank you, sir.
Lawmakers will soon depart Washington for a month-long recess. We'll take you to Capitol Hill next, where members of both parties are racing to get things done before they leave town. You're streaming America Decides.
An original documentary from CBS reports. Controversial Congressman George Santos.
Why won't you answer our questions?
How did he manage to get elected?
Thank you very much, and God bless you, and God bless the USA.
George Santos' campaign was a campaign of deceit, lies, fabrication.
And who is he, really?
I knew him as Anthony DeVolder from Queens.
Really, who he is, he's a fraud.
I compare him to the Tinder swindler.
From people who know him, the truth, the facts, the lies.
He would say that he was worth $100 million.
It's an incredibly cynical episode in American politics, beyond satire.
Had you ever seen anything like this?
No, and I hope I never see it again.
Campaign of Deceit, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She dazzled on the court and off the court as a businesswoman.
Thank you for joining us on Person to Person. Tennis superstar and entrepreneur Serena Williams.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
I asked my students, what are we going to do about racism in the United States?
The backlash over teaching about racism in American schools.
I don't think it has any place in the classroom.
We can either pretend and say, no, we're not racist and we're all great people, or we can actually start to do the really, really hard work of addressing it.
How did you lose your job? I made the statement that white privilege is a fact.
Is it helping diversity and inclusion?
When you bring in different people's stories and experience, it enriches education. If you don't talk about something, it doesn't go away.
Or driving us further apart?
What schools are doing to our children in the name of anti-racism is in fact teaching them racism.
The intention is to put us in this war against each other.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
I was entitled to equal pay for equal work under the law.
Does the Supreme Court's power need to be checked?
9 Supreme Court justices, 5 of them said no, she's not entitled. That's not right.
Calls to fix the court tend to go along with the politics of the moment.
Republican-appointed justices have all tended to go in one direction, with the Democratic-appointed justices tending to go in another.
Even though it's only 9 justices, it takes 5 of them to make the law of the land.
Does it have political impact? True. Political intent? Probably not true.
If the American people don't trust the judgment of their court, that's a real problem for our democracy.
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
Welcome back to America Decides. The clock is ticking on Capitol Hill because, barring any last-minute changes, lawmakers are scheduled to break for their traditional August recess even before August on Thursday night. There's still plenty left on the docket, including ongoing hang-ups over the bill that sets Pentagon policy. Dozens of nominees have yet to be confirmed by the Senate. There's other issues regarding the FAA and other must-pass legislation. CBS News congressional correspondent Scott McFarland joins us now from Capitol Hill, where he is tracking all of it. Scott, good to see you. Perhaps the most pressing matter, at least for the Senate this week, is that bill regarding Pentagon policy. They call it the NDAA up on Capitol Hill, not to be confused with the Collegiate Athletic Association. But tell us what's at stake there, what's in it, and why the Senate wants to get it done before they leave.
And nobody in human history, or very few people in human history, have ever used the phrase, man, this summer's just dragging. It's going so slow. Summers and summer vacations go by in a blink, which means the Senate's going to have to move on this so-called NDAA, National Defense Authorization. It's something that Congress must pass, one of those few things that has to get done. The U.S. House passed its bill earlier this summer, but they larded it up with some controversial language, including some restrictions on some abortion-related services for service members. And also, they put in end dates to some diversity and inclusion programs. The Senate's not going to do that, Ed. They're going to put in more granular, practical legislation that can get bipartisan support, that can see an end date to the debate. I expect there to be debate this week over amendments to add funding for mammograms for service women, adding funding or adding language that would help preclude the U.S. from using Chinese-made drones. More bipartisan flavor to the Senate bill, but really them passing this week could be the least of the issues. First of all, there's an absence this week. Dick Durbin of Illinois is out of here with COVID-related symptoms or a COVID diagnosis. And Ed, the Senate and House have to get on the same page. And right now they're speaking different languages on something they both must agree on, and Ed, something they both must pass.
Yeah. Do we have any sense if this week's floor debate on the bill is a way to end Alabama Senator Tommy Tuberville's ongoing hold or blockade, if you will, to at least slow down the confirmation of hundreds of military promotions?
There's going to be an awful lot of talk about that this week. Spot on, Ed. But there's no end date. There's no off-ramp to what Tommy Tuberville is doing. And that's what his fellow Republicans are saying, that he has put himself in a blockade position, stopping the quick confirmation or quick Senate approval of these appointments and these military promotions. And he has told me in so many words, the only way he'll yield his position is if the Pentagon ends its policy to pay for travel and for time off for service members who seek to move out of state to get abortion services. There doesn't seem to be any middle ground, which means this week will not end the standoff, though this week will feature a lot of discussion and debate about the standoff.
Right. And of course, that policy exists because of what happened with abortion policy, but no plans yet to hold an up or down vote on his proposal, right? And even then, he might still keep those holds in place.
And he's insisting that it's the minority right he's utilizing. The only right the minority has in the Senate, according to Tommy Tuberville, is the ability to change things like this, to put a hold on confirmations, to put a hold on appointments, to put a hold on what the majority is trying to do. And to a degree, in a simple way, he's right about that. But it's also a message he's trying to send, Ed, that he is going to be firm on this. His opponents will say intransigent on this. He's not going to yield until the Pentagon does, and there's no indication that's going to happen, certainly not anytime soon.
It's a reminder, senators do have the power to say no or to slow things down, and as he says, he's slowing them down, whether the rest of his colleagues like it or not. The other thing you track for us, of course, is the ongoing legal trouble for former President Donald Trump. It is a Monday. Remind us where things may head this week in the myriad cases facing him.
If there's going to be an indictment here in Washington, D.C. on the special counsel's January 6th investigation, it could come as early as tomorrow, 1 p.m. Eastern time, when the grand jury is here in the courthouse. The January 6th grand jury tends to meet on Tuesdays and Thursdays, Ed, and the magistrate judge tends to sit at 1 p.m. Eastern time to hear his or her caseload. That's the soonest it could happen, but there's certainly no date on the calendar that's a date certain. There's no indictment that is certain. All we can say is the target letter that Trump acknowledged and announced and that we have confirmed is an indication a federal prosecution is likely, if not imminent. You want to measure this by days and weeks, not by months and years.
So if you're one that's inclined to track this stuff closely, 1 p.m. Eastern Tuesday, mark your calendars, hit the refresh, or tune in here, and we'll let you know what the judge decides if they're in court to do so. Scott McFarland on Capitol Hill, tracking all things Congress and Mr. Trump's legal issues. We thank you. That does it for today. You can stream America Decides Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. Thank you for streaming CBS News.
It's a history-making meeting. 4 extraordinary women who are all 4-star